From the Kelly Studios at a supremely urban high school in beautiful Motown, the school day's most exciting hour of fantastic academics, the fabulous English language arts class. Reading, literature, comprehension, come on down. Grammatical convention, come on down. Vocabulary acquisition, come on down. And writing mechanism, come on down. These are the four main contestants in ELA. And now, here is the instructor of high school English, Professor Kelly.
During his journey to the coast, Equiano notes the manners and customs of different peoples. After 6 or 7 months of captivity, he arrives at the sea. The first object that saluted my eyes when I arrived on the coast was the sea, and a slave ship, which was then riding at anchor and waiting for its cargo. And when he talks about, he approaches the sea coast and he sees a slave ship waiting for its cargo, we could make a quick inference right there that we don't even have to write down. What is cargo? It's no other than cargo pants. We're talking about the supplies that usually a piece of transportation transports.
Like a ship.
Yeah, like a ship, like a train, like a moving van, anything that is supposed to be in that vehicle to be transported, any supplies that would be considered cargo. What do you think would be considered the supplies of a slave ship? Slaves. Okay, so no, guns did not make their way onto a slave ship. Remember, that's what the Europeans were trading for the slaves. So the Europeans are the ones who own the slave ships. They're the ones who are bringing the guns to Africa in exchange for the slaves. So the cargo that he's talking about these ships are waiting for would be the Africans, the captive Africans who are going to be enslaved. So that's how you have to break this down and be able to make it make sense to yourself. It doesn't matter whether you like reading or not. No one says you have to like this. We're not reading for enjoyment. Remember, this is a true story, and so we're trying to make sure that we make the most of our understanding during our time that we have to read. So we make inferences even when the text doesn't spell something completely out. We have to be able to think it through and spell it out for ourselves so that we can comprehend. Sometimes we're right, sometimes we're wrong. Okay? These filled me with astonishment, we continue reading, that was soon converted into terror, which I am yet at a loss to describe. And much more the then feelings of my mind when I was carried on board. I was immediately handled and tossed up to see if I was sound by some of the crew, and I was now persuaded that I had got into a world of bad spirits. To make sure that someone is sound, it means that you're trying to find out if they are of sound mind. Of a sound mind means that you are not troubled. Okay, it also means that you are not impaired. They want to make sure that he's not crazy. They want to make sure he's not slow. They want to make sure that he understands well. That's what it means. They tossed him up to make sure he was sound. They made sure he was good and he could be of good use. And that they were going to kill me. So he assumed that these people were not going to use him to be a slave, but that they were going to simply kill him. Their complexions, too, differing so much from ours. Their long hair and the language they spoke, which was very different from any I had ever heard, united to confirm in me this belief. So because the people looked so different, that's the reason why he thought he was going to be killed. How did these people look? When he says the complexion, what complexion is he talking about? They're white. It's not a probably. They are white. So these are Europeans, and he's never seen a European before. He's never seen a white person before. He's from Africa. He's from Nigeria. He's only seen black people before and people from other countries around him in Africa. He's never seen a white person before. So he's like, what is this long hair? What is this white, paly skin? And so it's scaring him. It's like he's seeing a ghost. So he thinks that they're monsters and they're going to kill him. And the language, he understands the languages of other countries in Africa, but not English. He doesn't understand this English they're speaking. So we continue. Indeed, such were the horrors of my views and fears at the moment, that if 10,000 worlds had been my own, I would have freely parted with them all to have exchanged my condition with the meanest slave in my own country. So because he thought that he was about to be killed, even if he had owned 10,000 worlds, he would have given all of that to trade places with the consequences that would have been given to the meanest slave in his own country. He would have felt more comfortable being in his own country, even given the consequences to the meanest slave. He would have received those consequences, because he knows that the consequences to the meanest slave in his country would have been different from the consequences that he feels these white people, the Europeans, are about to give him. Wither, sit up, we don't put our heads down. Thank you. We continue. When I looked round the ship too, I saw a large furnace or copper boiling, and a multitude of black people of every description, chained together, each one of their countenances expressing dejection and sorrow. I no longer doubted of my fate, and quite overpowered with horror and anguish, I fell motionless on the deck and fainted. When I recovered a little, I found some black people about me who I believe were some of those who brought me on board and have been receiving their pay. They talked to me in order to cheer me, but all in vain. I asked them if we were not to be eaten by these white men with horrible looks, red faces, and long hair. They told me I was not. And one of the crew brought me a small a small portion of spirituous liquor. What does spirituous mean? Remember when you see those numbers above the word, the definition is in the footnotes at the bottom. What does spirituous mean? Containing alcohol. Okay, so they brought him a little bit of alcohol because they felt like he was, bugging out, and we continued. But being afraid of him, this was some of the crew members of the Europeans who brought him the liquor, I would not take it out of his hand. One of the blacks therefore took it from him and gave it to me. And I took a little down my palate, your palate is your mouth, which instead of reviving me as they thought it would, threw me into the greatest consternation at the strange feeling it produced, having never tasted any such liquor before. Soon after this, the blacks who brought me on board went off and left me abandoned to despair. So, this is the area that I have marked off for you in the book in red, where I want you to consider this area for your first inference. And I have written down, again, questions 3 through 8 to correspond with each of the markings that I put in the book. So where it says on question number 3, first infer, and then question number 4, second infer, question number 5, third infer, question number 6, fourth infer, question number 7 is fifth infer, question number 8 is sixth infer. All of those questions correspond to the markings in the book. So remember, an area of uncertainty should bring about a question. I have assumed the area of uncertainty for you that I want you to acknowledge. I have created the question that I want you to utilize to help lead you to an inference. So now all that we have to do is follow the inference formula. And let's start with making our first inference. Now put details. Then remember, you are going to acknowledge that area in the book that I have marked off as first infer. You're going to acknowledge that area of uncertainty to find the facts and the details for our inference formula. So what do you think is the one sentence that we can label as facts and details that would have brought about this question? Find that one sentence in that area and write it down next to details in your lower right-hand box. Do that at this time. Find the one sentence that would have brought about this question. Why did the blacks stay to talk to Equiano? What sentence brought about this question? Why did the blacks stay to talk to Equiano? Corian, we took our hoods off already. Alright, so now you should have down at least one sentence. This should not have taken too much time or difficulty to find one sentence that would have brought about that question. You should have it written down, labeled as details. Now skip a line and put the words my knowledge. Put the words my knowledge on the next line. Okay? So now that you put down my knowledge, now you are going to gauge your own thoughts. Remember, this is the thinking class. Now you have to take the situation out of the context like we did before, and you have to bring something to the table from your own thoughts. So in this particular situation, you have black kidnappers that have kidnapped this young boy, and they have brought him on board of a slave ship for ransom. Why would anyone who is a kidnapper have to talk to, because that's what they did there, he said that they talked to him. Why would they have to talk to the person who they have kidnapped? That's what you are bringing the my knowledge about, or anything else that you want to bring about. Again, I'm just helping you along to get your thought processes going. What information can you bring to the table about this particular situation, taking it out of the context of this story and putting it in real life? Remember, you have to have some knowledge that you're bringing to the table all on your own. That's your common sense, as we talked about. So what can you bring to the table about this particular situation? You have a kidnapper who has taken a young boy away from his family, brought him onto a slave ship for ransom. Why would those kidnappers have to talk to this young boy who they kidnapped? No, you're going to write it down next to my knowledge. So remember, we're not actually doing this together. This is the independent practice. You are putting it on your paper next to my knowledge. This is what you're bringing to the table. So you need to think. You need to What do you think is the purpose of the constant conversations between this kidnapper and the kidnapped child? What's the constant conversation? What's a ransom? Right. And they're expecting to receive something in return. Huh? But they are talking to him. So read back through it and notice how they are talking to him. What do you think is that purpose of doing that? All right, now underneath the my knowledge portion, you should have something written down for my knowledge. Now you're going to put inference. Put equal sign inference. Equal sign inference. Equal sign inference. So under the my knowledge portion, you're going to put equal sign inference. Equal sign inference. And now you are going to add those two statements together. The facts and the details and the my knowledge portion. You're going to add those two statements together to come to a conclusion or an inference about what do you think is taking place in this portion of the story. And it should look like an answer to question number 3. So your inference should look like an answer to question number 3, but what you're doing is you're taking these two statements and you are putting them together. Put the two statements together, make them make sense with each other. Make them make sense with each other. So you're taking the facts and the details statement, which you took directly from the story, and you are going to add it to the my knowledge statement to come up with an inference. Add those two statements together and make them make sense with each other. Just like we added them together before, add them together this time. Make them make sense amongst each other. And that's your inference. Make sure you label this as your inference. Okay, so we are going to keep reading. Now, underneath your inference, you need to leave a little space for your evidence. So under your inference, put evidence. And as I keep reading, you are going to simply try, or maybe you have already found a sentence, but you're going to simply try to find a sentence that can support your inference. So remember, that's what the evidence is. The evidence is a sentence that can support your inference. So if you think that you found it already, you can write it down and label it as evidence. If you think that you have found a sentence from the story that can support your inference, write that down as evidence. It's not going to say the same exact thing, but it should say something along the lines of supporting what you said is taking place in this portion of the story, your inference. So I'm on page 151. Again, if you're still working on your inference, keep doing that. I'm just reading for the people who need to hear it. Okay, but I'm on page 151. I'm in the first column, second paragraph. Soon after this, the blacks who brought me on board went off and left me abandoned to despair. I now saw myself deprived of all chance of returning to my native country, or even the least glimpse of gaining the shore, which I now considered as friendly. And I even wished for my former slavery in preference to my present situation, which was filled with horrors of every kind, still heightened by my ignorance of what I was to undergo. I was not long suffered to indulge my grief. I was soon put down under the decks of the ship, and there I received such a salutation to my nostrils as I had never experienced in my life, so that with the loathsomeness of the stench and with my crying together, I became so sick and low that I was not able to eat, nor had I the least desire to taste anything. So, we're now in the area of our second inference, as it should be marked in your book. And so now we acknowledge question number 4. And question number 4, I asked, what is a salutation to my nostrils? End quote. Again, this is the question that you're going to have to lead you into making your inference in that area that I put second infer in. So now, with inference number 2, maybe you're on the back of your sheet, maybe you're on a separate sheet of paper. You're going to need a lot of paper for your inference, so I would use the back and then add on accordingly. Okay, so now, put details. Once again, we're going to keep going through the formula. We're going to keep going through the same formula. Okay, put details on your paper. Put the title details on your paper under inference number 2. And then, once again, you are going to go back and acknowledge that area that I put second infer next to in the book. And you're going to copy the part that you have a question about directly from the story. So what is the one sentence that you feel would have brought about this question? What is the one sentence that you feel would have brought about question number 4? You're going to label that as your details, copy it directly from the book. What is the one sentence that you feel would have brought about question number 4? And you're labeling it as details under inference number 2 on your paper. Once you feel you found that one sentence in that same area that I marked as second infer, you're going to write that sentence down. Label it as details. Alright, so far this is what you should have on your paper. So we read all the way to the top of page 151. Remember, this is the annotation inference model box. Your model box should be completely finished based on everything that we discussed and came in contact with from the first half of the story. So I'm only using this because my inference formula is right here, but there's a difference between your annotation inference model box, which should be completely finished and stored somewhere so you can submit it for points, and then your annotation inference independent box, which we're working on for independent practice. So now we should be on inference number 2. So you should have inference number 2 somewhere on your paper, and then you should have the word details somewhere on your paper for inference number 2. And we're going to follow the same exact formula every single time. So I'm going to sound like a broken record. I'm going to keep saying the same word over and over and over again. So in your book, I have marked next to everybody's 151 at the top of the second column. I put second infer right there because, again, I assumed all the areas of uncertainty for you because I am showing you how your brain should be curious about certain things while you're reading. And those areas of uncertainty and curiosity needs to help us to raise questions. So these are examples of how this area should have sparked some interest for you to want more knowledge about it. So we are now on question number 4 that I created for you, which is, what is a salutation to my nostrils? I felt like that would have tripped a decent amount of people up, and it usually does in 9th grade. And so we now should have the one sentence from that area that I marked second infer. You should have copied the one part that brought about that question directly from the story. So what do you think is the one sentence that would have brought about that question? And you should have copied that yesterday directly from the story and labeled it details. Now, let's go to my knowledge. So go to the next line and literally write the plus sign, my knowledge. Let's write plus sign and my knowledge. Plus sign and my knowledge. So after you write plus sign and my knowledge, remember you have to be able to bring some information to the table. Remember, this is the thinking class, so you have to sit there and you got to sweat some bullets, you got to figure some things out. That's perfectly fine, but you got to have something that you can bring to the table to help interpret the information from the story. So take the information from the story, take the situation out of the context of the story and place it in regular life. And try to figure out what you can interpret about that information, and then put it down next to my knowledge. If you cannot come up with any anything, you might want to use a reference guide, which is why, Makai, I told you should keep your cell phone out. If you would like to go to the dictionary, like we did with some of the inferences that we made together in the class practice, if you would like to go to the dictionary and maybe look up some things to have some knowledge to bring to the table, you can do so at this time. But you need to be able to put something in this area that you're bringing to the table, because you got to have something a part of your inference formula. So at this time, you're either interpreting your sentence that you wrote down directly from the story, and you're going to write something in the My Knowledge area, or you're going to reference material to find some information to help fill up this gap. Okay? So do that at this time. Inference formula, you should have something next to My Knowledge by now. And now we're going to drop to the next line, and we are going to put equal sign inference. Equal sign inference. And the inference should be a combination of these two statements. So literally, you are going to combine these two statements together. Again, don't just put them one on top of the other. You have to figure out how can you intertwine these two statements together to make them make sense amongst each other. And it should look like an answer to question number 4, but you're putting it next to equal sign inference. This is you reading in between the lines of the story to figure out what the author, Equiano, is really saying here in this portion of the story. Even though he didn't say it blatantly, that's what the inference is for. You're making an educated guess of what's taking place in this portion of the story. So again, you're taking your facts and details, which came from the story. You're taking your My Knowledge, which came from your brain. You're adding those two statements together. That's why I left the plus sign up there. And you are making those intertwine with each other, but placing them next to equal sign inference. This is your inference. This is your inference. All right, so now, if you don't have an inference so far, keep working on it, but now it's time to find some evidence. If you feel like you saw a sentence that relates to your inference, it's not going to say the same exact thing, but if you feel like something can support it and it's along the lines of what you're trying to say, you want to go ahead and snag that sentence and copy it directly from the story and put it next to evidence. So now you're going to drop down below your inference, and now you need to find evidence. So put evidence on your paper, and you need to find a sentence that actually defends what your inference is saying is really taking place in that part of the story. And label that as evidence. If you feel like you found a sentence, that is. If you don't feel like you found that sentence, then I'm going to continue reading. And maybe you'll hear something, or you can continue reading on your own, and maybe you'll find something there. But you got to find something to back it up. Remember, an educated guess really only becomes educated because you have something to support it. Now, I'm going to start on page 151. Again, keep working at your own pace, but keep in mind that before you leave 151, you need to make sure that you have found 2 unknown words that you'll later define. I'll give you time later to define all of your unknown words, but remember, before you leave each page, you need to find 2 words that you can define and put them under Annotate Unknown Words. And you need to find 2 details that you feel are important, and you need to fill them in on Notice Important Details. And then lastly, you need to figure out what is a question that you can raise about that page before you leave that page. But I'm going to go ahead and start back reading. So I'm on page 151. I'm in the second column. I am towards the top. Actually, I'm on line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm on line number 7 in the second column on the top. I now wished for the last friend death. Isaiah. Can you take your hood off for me, and can you sit up? Question. This is still instructional time, so I don't want you to miss this information just from going to the restroom. You don't know what to do with it though. Remember, the copying of information is really garbage. When Mr. Kelly is running his mouth, I know you all think that that's boring, but that's the instruction, because Mr. Kelly is the one who's teaching based on experience, college degree, certification to teach. So you have to actually listen when he's running his mouth, no matter how boring that is. I can't have you out in the hallways. I need you actually here paying attention, because you need to receive this instruction. You need to make sure that you're paying attention. I now wished for the last friend, death, to relieve me. But soon, to my grief, 2 of the white men offered me eatables, and that is eatables, not edibles. And on my refusing to eat, one of them held me fast by the hands and laid me across, I think, the windlass. And we know that when we see that number once again next to the word, the definition to the word is at the bottom. So a windlass is a device for raising something such as an anchor. So his feet were tied from the bottom, and they hoisted him into the air and tied my feet while the other flogged me severely. I had never experienced anything of this kind before, and although not being used to the water, I naturally feared that element the first time I saw it. Yet nevertheless, could I have got over the nettings, I would have jumped over the side. But I could not. And besides, the crew used to watch us very closely who were not chained down to the decks, lest we should leap into the water. I have seen some of these poor African prisoners most severely cut for attempting to do so, and hourly whipped for not eating. This indeed was often the case with myself. In a little time after, amongst the poor chained men, I found some of my own nation, which in a small degree gave ease to my mind. I inquired of these what was to be done with us. They gave me to understand we were to be carried to these white people's country to work for them. I was then a little revived and thought if it were no worse than working, my situation was not so desperate. But I still feared I should be put to death. The white people looked and acted as I thought, in so savage a manner, for I had never seen among any people such instances of brutal cruelty. I'm turning the page. And this is not only shown towards us blacks, but also to some of the whites themselves. One white man in particular I saw when we were permitted to be on deck, flogged so unmercifully with a large rope near the foremast that he died in consequence of it. And they tossed him over the side as they would have done a brute. This made me fear these people the more, and I expected nothing less than to be treated in the same manner. I could not help expressing my fearful apprehensions to some of my countrymen. I asked them if these people had no country, but lived in this hollow place, the ship. They told me they did not, but came from a distant one. Then, said I, how comes it that in all our country we never heard of them? They told me because they lived so very far off. I then asked where their women were. Had they any like themselves? I was told they had. And why, asked I, do we not see them? They answered, because they were left behind. I asked how the vessel could go. They told me they could not tell, but that there was cloth put upon the mast by the help of the ropes I saw. And then the vessel went on, and the white men had some spell or magic they put in the water, when they liked, in order to stop the vessel. I was exceedingly amazed at this account, and really thought they were spirits. I therefore wished much to be from amongst them, for I expected they would sacrifice me. But my wishes were in vain, for we were so quartered that it was impossible for any of us to make our escape. Now, let's move on to our next inference. We are on inference number 3, which is obviously on the previous page. So now let's skip a line and let's turn our voices off and let's put inference number 3, unless you already started working on it on your own. Put inference number 3. 151, you should have on your paper inference number 3, and we go back to the same exact formula. Okay, we go back to putting details on our paper. So that area that I wrote third infer next to, you are to observe that area as the area of uncertainty, because now I have a brand new question from that area of uncertainty. This is what your brain should have come to some curiosity about while you were reading. Okay, you should have wanted to know, what does it mean to be flogged? He's mentioned flogged a number of times. And this is such an old word that I know that this would have tripped you up in what he's really discussing here. So we're going to bring some clarity to this area of confusion. Go back to that area that I marked off and find the one sentence that would have brought about this question for your third inference. Again, label it as details. You're looking through your book in that area that I wrote third infer next to. Try to find one sentence in that area that you feel would have brought about this question number 5. What does it mean to be flogged? What statement from the book that you're going to copy directly from the book do you think created this question? What statement do you think created this question? Copy it directly from the book. Label it as details.
What question?
It's question number 5. So I'm glad you asked that at just the right time. That's why I'm glad that you're still in here, not at the restroom, because even though you have a copy of this, you don't understand what this means. So I'm glad you asked that. So remember, I've created a number of questions to guide you in your inferences, and so I put those red markings in the book, and I've created the questions that I want to guide you to making your inferences. So we're on question number 5 now, where I put third infer, and now you're acknowledging that area in the book where I also put third infer, and you're looking for the one part that you feel would have brought about this question, and you're writing that one part down, but you're taking it directly from the book. Take it directly from the book and write it down. Now, I see some people have been writing, so let's go ahead and move on to the my knowledge part for this third inference. Put plus sign my knowledge, plus sign my knowledge, plus sign my knowledge. And now, again, you have to take the situation out of the context of the story. Okay, maybe based on the context clues, or based on how you interpreted what's going on, or maybe going to another piece of reference material. What words from that sentence that you copied down do you might want to make sense out of? What information from your background or experiences do you think you can bring to the table to help you make sense of this situation? So again, you need some type of common sense or knowledge that you can bring to the table. Either you can search a reference guide like a dictionary, or you can gauge your own experiences and common sense. But you gotta have something that you can put next to my knowledge. I'm gonna give you some time to go ahead and do that. You gotta have something you can put next to my knowledge. Gauge your own experience. That means you're interpreting the sentence that you wrote down. Try to interpret the sentence that you wrote down. Or maybe go to a reference guide and make sense out of some of the words that you don't know, and bring that to the table, writing it down next to my knowledge. And keep in mind that all you're really trying to do is somehow make this text make sense somehow. When I go back through and I look through all of this and I grade it, I'm just looking to make sure that you had something as far as information that you were able to put down in some type of way to interpret that information and make it make sense. We might come up to different inferences because we all don't have the same knowledge. But now, let's go, speaking of inference, let's go to the next line and let's put equal sign inference. If you're still working on the previous portion, keep doing so. But you can drop down to the next line, put equal sign inference, and remember, that is a combination of the facts and details from the story and my knowledge and experience that you brought to the table. Add those two statements together, again, intertwine both of them so they make sense amongst each other. And it really should, when I say it, I'm talking about your inference, it really should look like an answer to question number 5. Okay, what does it mean to be flawed? It should really, once you add those two statements together, it really should look like an answer to question number 5. But you're putting it next to the word equal sign inference. All right, now, if you feel like you have come across a sentence that supports what you said your inference is, you're going to snag that sentence from the story and you are going to label it as evidence. Again, if you feel like you have made it to a sentence that is along the lines of stating what you said is going on in your inference, you are going to write that sentence down directly from the story and label it as evidence. Alright, so if you're still working, keep working. Okay, I'm just going to finish off page 152. And when I finish it, you need to make sure that, again, you have found 2 words. Because remember, completing a page means you got to find 2 unknown words that I'll give you time to define, 2 pieces of important details that you can write down, and then a question that you can raise. So I'm going to finish this off, and then you should be looking for that information as you're finishing your inference. I'm at the bottom of 152, first column, last paragraph. While we stayed on the coast, I was mostly on deck. And one day, to my great astonishment, again, like I said before, he loves this word astonishment, I saw one of these vessels coming in with the sails up. As soon as the whites saw it, they gave a great shout, as which we were amazed, and the more so as the vessel appeared larger by approaching nearer. At last she came to an anchor in my sight, and when the anchor was let go, I and my countrymen who saw it were lost in astonishment to observe the vessel stop. And we were now convinced it was done by magic. Soon after this, the other ship got her boats out, and they came on board of us. And the people of both ships seemed very glad to see each other. Several of the strangers also shook hands with us black people and made motions with their hands, signifying, I suppose, we were to go to their country. But we did not understand them. At last, when the ship in which we were had got in all her cargo, we made ready with many fearful noises, and we were all put under deck, so that we could not see how they managed the vessel. But this disappointment was the least of my grief. The stench of the hold. Notice that when it says hold, it has that number right up top, which we know we can find the definition for that word at the bottom in the footnotes. A hold is a what? The interior below the decks of a ship. Okay, so Again, this is where the slaves were stuffed into like sardines and chained to those decks, not to be able to move or go anywhere until the destination or voyage was finished or reached. So for weeks at a time. So the stench of the hold while we were on the coast was so intolerably loathsome that it was dangerous to remain there for any time. And some of us have been permitted to stay on the deck for the fresh air. But now that the whole ship's cargo were combined together, it became absolutely pestilential. The closeness of the place and the heat of the climate added to the number in the ship, being so crowded that each had scarcely room to turn himself, almost suffocated us. This produced copious perspirations. Perspiration is when you're sweating, you got the beads of water or sweat on you. This produced copious perspiration so that the air soon became unfit for respiration. Respiration is breathing. From a variety of loathsome smells, and brought on a sickness among the slaves, of which many died. Thus falling victim to the improvident avarice, as I may call it, of their purchasers. So let's break this down a little bit. Even though I didn't make an inference out of this part, we can orally make some common sense out of this situation that he's currently in. So they're in the ship, they're in the bottom deck of it, and he's talking about the closeness of them, and any movement that they make, which is barely any, is causing them to sweat. Okay, and the sweat is causing them to become sick, because we know that when we sweat, we eventually what? Stink. And when we sweat, we eventually stink, and that stink is supposed to be washed away. But when you are in a confined means close. Woods, can I have you take your glasses off, please, so I can see your eyes? When you're in a confined space, you obviously are not about to go take a shower or even relieve yourself properly. It's not like they can say, Master, could you unlock my shackles so I can go use the bathroom real quick? You know, like you all do, like they're about to defecate and urinate on themselves right in those same spots. And then usually people smelling other people's bodily fluids and functions, that makes them sick and makes them regurgitate or vomit. Okay, so all of that is happening in this place, but I want to look specifically at where he says improvident avarice. Okay, because I know that that part was just swept over you like, huh? Whatever. So again, wherever there is an area of uncertainty, we want to try to make some type of sense out of it so we can comprehend and read in between the lines like an inference is supposed to do in the first place. So let's go to dictionary.com for the source and the when, and then let's type in both of those words. So improvident means the following. Okay, not provident, lacking foresight, incautious or unwary. Also, it says that improvident is neglecting to provide for future needs. Okay, so what it seems like improvident means is that the necessities of these people, or whatever these people are required to have in order to survive, they are not being given, and whatever they're supposed to have moving forward is not even being attended to. So they are not being looked out for or cared for in any portion of it. So lacking foresight, incautious, and unwary. Now let's look up avarice and let's see what that is. All right. Avarice. Avarice says okay. Now, if we could get back to the lesson. Avarice says that it is insatiable greed. Insatiable means there's no way to satisfy. Greed for riches, inordinate, miserly desire to gain and hoard wealth. If you hoard wealth and you're talking about being an improvident avarice, meaning that you don't look out for the well-being of people, what type of wealth is not being looked out for these slaves? What are they in need of that is not being cared for or tended to in this situation? Clean air. Okay? Restrooms, the opportunity to relieve yourself in a sanitary manner. Okay, so these are the things that he is talking about that are not being provided to them in their situation. Let's continue. I'm on page 152 at the bottom of the second column. This deplorable, I'm 3 lines from the bottom, 3 lines from the right in the middle of that line. This deplorable situation was again aggravated by the galing of the chains, now become insupportable, and the filth of the necessary tubs into which the children often fell, and were almost suffocated. The shrieks of the women and the groans of the dying rendered it a scene of horror almost inconceivable. Happily, perhaps for myself, I was soon reduced so low here that it was thought necessary to keep me almost continually on deck. And from my extreme youth, I was not put in fetters. Fetters are chains. In this situation, I expected every hour to share the fate of my companions, some of whom were almost daily brought upon deck at the point of death. And I began to hope that death would soon put an end to my miseries. Often did I think many of my inhabitants, let's try that again. Often did I think many of the inhabitants of the deep much more happy than myself. I envied them the freedom they enjoyed, and as often wished I could change my condition for theirs. Every circumstance I met with served only to render my state more painful and heighten my apprehensions and my opinion of the cruelty of the whites. One day, they had taken a number of fishes, and when they had killed and satisfied themselves with as many as they thought fit, to our astonishment who were on the deck, rather than give any of them to us to eat, Philip, as we expected, they tossed the remaining, why is your book closed? They tossed the remaining fish into the sea again, although we begged and prayed for some as well as we could, but in vain. And some of my countrymen, being pressed for hunger, took an opportunity, when they thought no one saw them, of trying to get a little privately, but were discovered. And the attempt procured for them some very severe floggings. Mr. Hall. All right, so we have reached the area of our 4th inference, and so we are going to go ahead and approach that inference area. So on your paper, go ahead and put 4th inference, wherever you are now on your paper, put 4th inference, put 4th inference, acknowledging that that's where you're going to work on your 4th inference. And then we are going to go to our same inference formula, the same one, the same exact way. So the first thing you need to put on your 4th inference is the word details. Put details on your inference formula. Put inference on your details on your inference formula, and remember that an area of uncertainty allows the opportunity to create a question that could possibly bring about an inference. So the area of uncertainty that I want you to acknowledge is in the book where I place that fourth infer in red marking. You are going to use this question. We're now on question number 6. You're going to use this question to help guide you in making your inference. So the question I created is, who were the inhabitants of the deep? And that's the question that we want to acknowledge here. Who were the inhabitants of the deep? First thing that you need to do is to report back to that area marked fourth infer, and you need to find the one sentence that you think would have brought about question number 6, and you're going to copy that directly under details. Okay? These are the facts and the details of the story that we are placing in our inference formula. What is the one sentence or statement that you think brought about this question? Who were the inhabitants of the deep? And you're copying it directly from the story, as we have continued to say in our inference formula. Now, if you feel like you have found a sentence, then let's move on. If you have not, then you're going to keep working. Remember, you're working at your own pace. Now, let's go to the next part of our formula. You're going to put plus sign my knowledge. Plus sign my knowledge. Now, keep in mind, in the my knowledge space, you are going to simply, or maybe it's not so simple for you, you are going to take the situation out of the context of the story, and you're going to place it in a real world situation, because we have lived 14, 15 years, and we have enough experience to be able to interpret this situation. Okay, so again, take the situation out of the context of the story, place it in your own world, because you're supposed to be bringing some common sense to the situation. That's what the my knowledge area is for. What common sense can you bring to this situation about what's going on? So you have inhabitants in the deep. If you cannot figure something out on your own, then you might want to use a piece of reference material, just like we did on that previous inference about improvident, avarice, but also what we did in the class practice. Use a piece of reference material. So there's a reason I haven't told you to turn off your cell phones. Maybe you want to do just a little bit of research about what's stopping you from understanding that sentence that you gathered from the text. Okay, if any of those words are tripping you up, then you want to do a little bit of research to provide clarity and make that your my knowledge. Because you got to have something to bring to the table. So we're either researching or we are thinking. What can you bring to the table, and label it as my knowledge. Alright, now, again, if you're still working, keep working on your my knowledge, but if you're ready to move on, now you're going to skip a line and put equal sign inference. Equal sign inference, and we're going to finish up this equation of ours, equal sign inference. So now you are going to add the facts and the details statement to the my knowledge portion of the equation, and you literally have to figure out a way to mesh those two statements together. Okay, make them make sense amongst each other. Don't just put one on top of the other. Combine them and make them make sense. It should look like, if you do it correctly, an answer to number 6. Okay, so look like you have read it between the lines and provided clarity for what is obscure in that part of the book. Okay, what do you think Equiano is alluding to? That should be your inference. It should look like an answer to question number 6, but a combination of these two. And label it as inference. Then, below that, you're going to write evidence, and if you feel like, because I read a decent amount, if you feel like I read over a statement that can be provided as evidence, then select that statement from the book and write it as evidence. But the evidence needs to come directly from the text. Evidence needs to come directly from the text. And your evidence, again, is not going to say the exact same thing. Your evidence should be along the lines of supporting what your inference says. So it should be good enough to support it. go ahead and move on. But if you are still working, then you are still working, and you're working at your own pace. But one thing I want to remind and caution you of is we have just finished 152, and now we're going to continue into 153, finishing that up. But remember, you're supposed to be getting all the requirements of your annotation independent practice portion before we leave each page. So remember, you should have, so far, you should have a total of, because we passed up 151 and 152, you should already have a total of at least 4 unknown words, because we passed up 2 pages and you need 2 from each page. You should have a total of 4 unknown words, which I will give you time to define. You should have a total of 4 important details that you have placed in the top left-hand box, and then you also should have asked a total of 2 questions. Okay? Alright, so I'm on 153. I'm at the bottom of the first column. Bottom of the first column. Last paragraph. One day, when we had a smooth sea and moderate wind, 2 of my wearied countrymen, who were chained together, I was near them at the time, preferring death to such a life of misery, somehow made through the nettings and jumped into the sea. Immediately, another quite dejected fellow, who, on account of his illness, was suffered to be out of irons, also followed their example. And I believe many more would very soon have done the same if they had not been prevented by the ship's crew, who were instantly alarmed. Those of us who were the most active were in a moment put down under the deck. And there was such a noise and confusion among the people of the ship as I never heard before. To stop her and get the boat out to go after the slaves. However, 2 of the wretches were drowned, but they got the other, and another flogged him unmercifully, for thus attempting to prefer death to slavery. In this manner, we continue to undergo more hardships than I can now relate. Hardships which were inseparable from this accursed trade, the transatlantic slave trade, that is. Many a time we were near suffocation from the want of fresh air, being deprived thereof for days together. This and the stench of the necessary tubs. That's okay. This and the stench of the necessary tubs carried off many. During our passage, I saw flying fishes, which surprised me very much. They used frequently to fly across the ship, and many of them fell on the deck. I also now first saw the use of the quadrant. The quadrant is defined for us at the bottom. What is a quadrant? Thank you. A quadrant, thank you very much. A quadrant is an instrument used for measuring altitudes. What is an altitude? Height. It is height. How many people have been on an airplane before? Okay, about half of us. I've never been on an airplane before. That's a whole nother show. I don't, airplanes. But when you start to go down the runway and then you climb in the air, you're climbing in altitude. Altitude is how you measure height. So this instrument is an instrument for measuring the height of something. Let's continue reading. I had often, with astonishment, seen the mariners make observations with it, and I could not think what it meant. They at last took notice of my surprise, and one of them, willing to increase it as well as to gratify my curiosity, made me one day look through it. The clouds appeared to me to be land, which disappeared as they passed along. So there's this instrument that the crew members of the boat are using, and you can look through it, and you generally use it to observe the clouds and specifically to understand the height of them. Let's make an inference right here on the spot. What do you think the purpose of this quadrant instrument is for? Why would they need to look at the cloud? What's the purpose of looking at the clouds and understanding the height of the clouds? Hello? To navigate or to watch for storms. So the first one, I'll challenge you on that, because you wouldn't necessarily want to watch the clouds for navigating, because clouds move with you. You know, they're either moving against or in the same direction. So you wouldn't want to watch something that actually moves. But I don't think you want to watch clouds for the time, maybe the sun and the sky for time. But the second part that you said, watching for the weather, could be an instance of an inference. So what does dark cloud symbolize? That it's about to be a storm. If we have low clouds, that creates what? Fog. Okay, low clouds creates fog. Okay, but also if they are just regular gray and they look full and kind of low, you assume that there's probably going to be rain. And if you're out on the water, you want to be able to predict something like that. So, Asia, hit the lights for us. All right, so I'm going to provide you with just a little bit of information. Again, this is the my knowledge that we're bringing to the table. Well, actually, you already provided the my knowledge. You provided the my knowledge, and so I want to bring some other information to try to see if we can come to a concise conclusion. All right. All eyes on the screen. All eyes on the screen.
Turning to the forecast now with Paul, tracking flurries overnight. And Paul, what are we looking like for the morning commute here?
Yeah, hey, buddy, we're looking okay, I think. We have, Storm Tracker 4 showing what looks like some snow in the area, but this stuff is not even reaching the ground. In fact, I have checked every single airport here in southern Michigan, and there is not one that's reporting even a flake. Now, back down to the southwest, we do have some snow there, but again, here in our part of the state, there is nothing that is falling and reaching the ground, and in fact, it's not clear here. I explained this earlier. The automated reporting station has an instrument that measures the base of the clouds. It's called a salometer, and it cannot see clouds above 12,000 feet. So actually, at City Airport,
So this salometer thing, he said it is an instrument, and it's used for measuring the base of the clouds. So maybe this quadrant thing that Equiano was describing for us, maybe it's an earlier version of detecting the weather. And later in life, maybe it became called salometer. So this is how, again, we want to be able to provide clarity for things that are not necessarily pointed out for us. So did Equiano tell us that this thing was called salometer? Does it make sense that this might be an earlier version of a weather detecting instrument?
Yes.
Yes. And so again, this making inferences concept, it has nothing to do with strictly reading an English class and boring books. Oh my God. Okay, it's about providing clarity in life when you're only provided with certain information and your thoughts. When that's all that you can go on. Okay? The last time that we worked together, we were talking about page 153, I think it is, at the very bottom of the second column, where we were talking about Equiano coming in contact with that quadrant device. And we said that that quadrant device was an instrument that he could look through and also observe the altitude of the clouds. and we made a prediction or an inference of what it would be used for as far as, its importance. And our inference was that maybe it was a weather detecting device in its early form, and that was our inference. And this was an inference that we made orally. You didn't have to write this one down. I didn't make it a part of your actual project assignment, but I do want to make sure that we discussed it because it's always one that I enjoy figuring out. So I took us to a newscast meteorologist, and we looked at what he used and called the salometer. And the salometer, he said, was an instrument that is used to measure the base of the clouds in order to tell when precipitation is emitted from them. And so we use that as our evidence to basically back up and support our inference of this quadrant device being an early weather detecting instrument. So again, that's how we make inferences, by making educated guesses and being able to support it with information, and then going to get a little bit of evidence to back it up. Okay, an educated guess. So now we are on inference number 5 because we read over that on 153 already. And so if you need to read back over it silently, that's fine. But keep in mind that inference number 5 pertains to question number 7. So where I marked in your book, fifth infer, that is the area of uncertainty that you are going to acknowledge. That's the area that I want you to observe for the question that I created, which says, what is a necessary tub and why are they harmful? So you are going to use this question in the area of uncertainty to follow the inference formula. Remember, areas of uncertainty allow us opportunities to make questions, and from questions we can create inferences. So let's put inference number 5 on our paper. Inference number 5. Let's write inference number 5. Inference number 5 on our paper. So, Ms. Dale, we have out our annotation inference independent box. So now that you have inference number 5, put the first part of the formula on there, details. Put details on your paper, and you're going to go back to that area that I have written fifth infer, and I want you to find the one sentence, and actually he mentions it a couple of different places in that page 153, but just find the one sentence that you feel brought about this question in the first place. And what is the one sentence that you feel brought about the question, what is a necessary tub and why are they harmful? And then you are going to write it down next to details. Alright, so now let's go ahead and drop down to the next line. If you're still working, remember you're working at your own pace, that's fine. But otherwise, let's go down to the next line and let's put plus sign my knowledge to keep on track with this inference formula. Plus sign my knowledge. And remember, we want to take the situation out of the context of the story and try to interpret it in our own 15, 14 years that we have lived. Let's make it make sense in our own lives in 2023, 2024, and let's bring some common sense to the table and put it next to my knowledge. So this is the thinking part, remember, this is the thinking class. Now, if you cannot bring anything to the table, you're thinking and you're like, I got nothing, then you need to pull out your cell phone. That's why I did not have you to turn it off, and do a little bit of research. So remember, anytime that I needed to research something for these other inferences, if I couldn't think of anything on my own, I went to dictionary.com and I broke down some of the words in that phrase, and I dug for a good enough definition that matched the context in which Equiano was talking about it. So I didn't just select the first definition when I went. I dug and found a deeper definition that matched how he was using it, and I put that as my knowledge. So maybe you want to do a little bit of digging and a little bit of research, so you have something to bring to the table. You got to have something, and put it next to my knowledge. All right, so now if you have something next to my knowledge, then you want to go ahead and add those two statements together. So remember, you should, if you're finished, if you're not finished, keep working at your own pace, but you need to be able to combine the facts and the details from the story. And remember, this is not always from a story. Inferences can be made on regular life. Okay, again, especially if you were some forensics detective in some police department trying to piece together the evidence of a murder scene. But right now it is from a story. So go ahead and put your facts and details and match it up with your my knowledge statement, and you are going to make them make sense among each other. Okay, figure out a way to mesh those two statements together, and if you do it well enough, it should look like an answer to question number 7. So again, put equal sign inference on that next line, equal sign inference, and add these two statements together to make them make sense. But also it should look like an answer to question number 7 about our 5th inference. And remember, this is us reading in between the lines, trying to find what Equiano has not spelled out clearly, and we want to move that obscurity to try to figure out, okay, what is going on here? Because we want to comprehend as much as we possibly can. We might be right, we might be wrong, but our educated guess has to be somehow connected to the story, but including whatever information and common sense we brought to the table. So this is your inference. So again, you're probably still working, and if you are, that's fine. But once you have your inference created, you are going to then put evidence on your paper. If you think anywhere on that page that we have read something that qualifies as evidence, in so many words, it backs up or supports what your inference says. It's not going to say the exact same thing, but it should be along the lines of supporting what your inference says. If you think that there's a sentence that does that, go ahead and pull that sentence directly from the story and put it down as your evidence. Now I'm going to keep reading, and I want to finish up the story. So there's only one page left to go, and then we're going to work on inference number 6, and we're finished. And the rest of the week, you will have to finish up this project and to finish up any other work that you need to on the Teams page. All right, I am going to start, again, keep working at your own pace. I'm going to start, though, on page 153 at the bottom of the second column, and where it says, this heightened my wonder. This is line number 4 from the bottom. Again, 153, second column, last paragraph, line number 4 from the bottom. You just finished talking about the quadrant. All right, so this heightened my wonder, and I was now more persuaded than ever that I was in another world, and that everything about me was magic. At last, we came in sight, we turned the page, of the island of Barbados. Remember, when we see that number up top, that means that the definition is at the bottom. What is Barbados? Huh? At the bottom, it says Barbados is what? An island country in the West Indies. We've talked about the West Indies before when we were discussing Christopher Columbus, and remember he was supposed to be going to the East Indies to get another route to India, a quicker route that he was discovering for Europe to get to India so they could do their trading. But again, because he didn't have technology, he ended up in the Virgin Islands, and he just went ahead and called that the West Indies. Even though he wasn't in India, he ended up calling the indigenous people Indians, even though they weren't Indians at all. And so that same area is where we are when we talk about Barbados. Okay. which the whites on board gave a great shout and made many signs of joy to us. We did not know what to think of this, but at last the vessel drew nearer. But as the vessel drew nearer, we plainly saw the harbor and other ships of different kinds and sizes, and we soon anchored amongst them off Bridgetown. So again, we go down to Bridgetown, and we see that Bridgetown is the what? It's the capital of Barbados. Okay. So we continue. Many merchants and planters now came on board, though it was in the evening. They put us in separate parcels and examined us attentively. They also made us jump and pointed to the land, signifying we were to go there. We thought by this we should be beaten by these ugly men as they appeared to us. Now I want to make notice how Equiano keeps acknowledging these Europeans look to him. So he said that he was not used to seeing their complexion of skin, which we know is white. He said he wasn't impressed by their long, straight hair. He also said he didn't like their red faces, and now he is calling them ugly. And he thought that they were monsters, but I forget which word that he used. But it's important to signify here that he's not classifying this white skin as a sign of beauty. So too many times in the media, we have this presentation that white skin is the basically the golden standard. Okay, so you're supposed to have white skin, you're supposed to have this, straight hair and blue eyes, blondes, whatever. And he's acknowledging here that this was not a sign of beauty for him. And it's important that we acknowledge that and that we don't try to adhere to that standard with ourselves. I just wanted to point that out, that he is time and time again acknowledging that this type of look is not the golden standard. And throughout history, it has had to be pointed out time and time again for black people to try to not follow in those footsteps to look like that. So, as they appeared to us, and when soon after we were all put under the deck again, there was much dread and trembling among us, and nothing but bitter cries to be heard all of the night from these apprehensions, insomuch that at last the white people got some old slaves from the land to pacify us. They told us we were not to be eaten, but to work, and were soon to go on land where we should see many of our country people. This report eased us much, and sure enough, soon after we landed, there came to us Africans of all languages. We were conducted immediately to the merchant's yard, where we were all pent up together like so many sheep in a fold, without regard to sex or age. As every object was new to me, everything I saw filled me with surprise. What struck me first was that the houses were built with bricks in stories, and were in every other respect different from those I had seen in Africa. But I was still more astonished at seeing people on horseback. I now know that I did not know what this could mean. So remember at the end of our new historicism notes and our colonialism notes, remember I said that the Europeans would basically degrade the lifestyles of other cultures of people, even the mud huts that they lived in, if it didn't add up to the standard in which they were used to. So notice how Equiano is surprised by seeing these brick houses. So now you can understand why the Europeans would, make fun of them in the way that they live, because there's a difference between the way that they live. Not that one is worse than the other, but there's a difference. So when we see brick houses in different stories, that's a European design. And again, the different structures that are apparent in Africa are simply of another culture. Not to be considered worse, no. And indeed, I thought these people full of nothing but magical arts. While I was in this astonishment, I need your eyes on the page, Miss Jordan. Let's do running number 1. I'm not sure what your fascination with Bay. With Mr. Pope. But I need your eyes in the book. All eyes should be in the book. So while I was in this astonishment, one of my fellow prisoners spoke to a countryman of his about the horses, who said they were the same kind they had in their country. I understood them, though they were from a distant part of Africa, and I thought it odd I had not seen any horses there. But afterwards, when I came to converse with different Africans, and converse is the proper way to say that. I know a lot of times we say, oh, I'm just conversating with so-and-so. Conversating is not a word. It's called conversing. A lot of times we say conversating is conversing, though. When I came to converse with different Africans, I found they had many horses among them, and much larger than those I then saw. We were not many days in the merchant's custody before we were sold after the usual manner, which is this. On a signal given, such as the beat of a drum, the buyers rush at once into the yard where the slaves are confined and make choice of which parcel they like best. The noise and clamor with which this is attended, and the eagerness visible in the countenances of the buyers, serve not a little to increase the apprehensions of the terrified Africans, who may well be supposed to consider them the ministers of that destruction in which they think themselves devoted. Okay, so this, this institution of slavery and rushing into a yard where an auction is taking place. Can I get $50? $50, $100 going once, $100 going twice. People are sitting there saying, yeah, I'll take that one, the strong big one right there. You can work on my field. He's saying that these people who are involving themselves in this institution of slavery and this auction are involved in this destruction, and they're like the ministers of this destruction. So they're like the head of this destruction, and they're devoted to it. So in this manner, without scruple, our relations and friends, I'm reading that one. In this manner, without scruple, our relations and friends separated, most of them never to see each other again. I remember in the vessel in which I was brought over, in the man's apartment, there were several brothers who, in the sale, were sold in different lots. Imagine you being separated from your brother. He's probably like one of your best dogs, And it was very moving on this occasion to see their distress and hear their cries at parting. O ye nominal Christians. If we look at the bottom, we see nominal means what? In name only. So he's saying that these Europeans are Christians only by name. They're not Christians by deed. They are not doing the Lord's work. He said, you only call yourself Christians. Might not an African ask you, learn you this from your God, who says unto you, do unto all men as you would men should do unto you? Is it not enough that we are torn from our country and friends to toil for your luxury and lust of gain? Must every tender feeling be likewise sacrificed to your avarice? Remember, avarice is greed of wealth. Are the dearest friends and relations now rendered more dear by their separation from the rest of their kindred, still to be parted from each other, and thus prevented from cheering the gloom of slavery? With the small comfort of being together and mingling their sufferings and sorrows? Why are parents to lose their children, brothers their sisters, and husbands their wives? Surely this is a new refinement and cruelty, which, while it has no advantage to atone for it, thus aggravates distress and adds fresh horrors even to the wretchedness of slavery. End quote, and end this excerpt. So, again, this is a whole novel that Equiano created, but this is only what they've placed in the book for us. Again, when we talk about our new historicism and certain people being in control of what is delivered and what is not delivered, this was the section they decided to give to us. So we're going to close it off there, but we're going to work on inference number 6. So on your paper, put inference number 6. And for inference number 6, I have created the last question, number 8, for you. So remember, I marked in your book on page 154 the area of uncertainty that I felt would have gone way over your head that I want you to acknowledge for making this inference. So again, in that book on 154, you're going to acknowledge where it says 6 infer, and this is the question I created for you. Why would merchants, we said merchants are people who buy and sell, why would merchants and planters board the ships and examine their jumping and pointing? Okay, so we're going to acknowledge that question in this area of uncertainty, and we're going to let that guide us in our inference. So on your paper, put inference number 6. On your paper, put inference number 6. Rayvon, you didn't have to close, y'all didn't have to close y'all book. You're going to have to go back and get this information. I just closed it because I'm finished reading. Okay, put inference number 6. And you're going to finish following the inference formula. You're going to go back to page 153, and you're going to put details on your paper. Find the one sentence, Ms. Fletcher. Find the one sentence that you feel would have brought about question number 8 in the first place. You're going to write that down next to details. Then you are going to put plus sign my knowledge. Remember, you have to bring something to the table as far as what you are adding to this situation from your own experience and common sense. Add those two statements together to equal your inference, and find something on that page, since we are finished reading, for your evidence to back it up and qualify it. And hopefully now that we're finished with the story, you get some type of acknowledgement of how our new historicism notes play into this story. So we know that this is a marginalized voice because it's a black man, a minority figure, and we are using his story as an actual history. Even though it's not in a history book, we are using it as a history because this is the voice of something that was not present in the history books. And we know that because in our PowerPoint notes, they didn't go in depth about slavery like Equiano did. And so that's why we had to go to the source, which is what new historicism allows us to do. Okay, so that's why we went over new historicism as a literary criticism. We wanted to be able to see this story as such for what is not in our history books, but what voices have been silenced that we have to go to. Just like when we did with John Lewis and his March novel. That wasn't in a history book, but we used that as a direct reference to the civil rights movement. And so that was a history just as well. All right, so I'm coming around. I'm going to spray your desk. We are officially finished with this project, but you're going to use the rest of the week to collect everything else that you're supposed to collect. So I'm coming around in just a second. I just want to explain. By now, you should have 8 different important details that you have collected from the whole second half of the story. It should be a total of 8. You should have a total of 8 unknown words that you have collected from the second half of the story, and you're going to have the rest of the week to define those words. You should have a total of at least 4 or 5 questions, one from each of those pages, that you created based on what you wanted to know more of from the second half of the story. And you should have a total of 6 inferences. Okay, 6 inferences.